In this video, I'll show you how to use gradients inside of Photoshop, and this is a pretty easy lecture, but let's go ahead and reset Photoshop back to its defaults in case you've added a lot of swatches and it's starting to get a little hard to see everything. So you can, of course, go up to Window Workspace, and I have my Jeremy workspace selected. I can hit Reset Jeremy, and it'll reset everything back to its defaults as when I originally made it. I go to swatches. This should be reset. If it's not, and you click on this option, you can go to reset swatches. It'll say, do you want to append the default colors or just replace them? We're going to hit OK, so it replaces them. And then now we're back to just the default swatches that Photoshop offers us. So let's take a quick look. If we needed to use any of our swatches, like say we selected our paintbrush, you can see the foreground color is black, and if I start coloring, it's going to be that black color. If I go over it and I pick a swatch color, it changes the foreground color, and then when I paint, I have that foreground color. So now we can use these swatches any way that we see fit. So I'm just going to undo those. And that's a great way to paint, and you'll see swatches in all sorts of different things. Like when we use the shape tool, you'll see the fill color here, and it gives us all of the different swatches so that when we create that shape, it fills it in with that color there. So let's go ahead and undo that. But let's take a look at something else that you'll use often, and that's what's called a gradient. So we have the gradient tool in the tools bar. And if I select that and change our colors black to white again, if I click and drag a line with the gradient tool, it's going to blend those colors together. So you can see we were black to white is our gradient selected at the top, black to white. And when I click and drag, it creates that nice smooth transition. And it doesn't matter what angle I create that from, it's going to create that gradient. Now, right now I have it selected to this. I never changed it back reflected. Let's just go ahead and move that to this first one here. And then it'll give us a nice smooth gradient. And no matter where I click and drag that gradient, it's going to create it for us. So it does a nice smooth transition. Now you can see we have different types of gradients. So we have a circular type gradient. We have this clock kind of looking gradient. We have the first one that I had selected, which is more of like a bar, but it creates that smooth transition. And then we have this pyramid kind of shaped gradient. So we'll change it back to the first one. Now, if we click on that drop-down box for that gradient, you can see that we have a bunch of preset gradients that we can pick here. Now, I've loaded a lot of these in to show you, but if I select one, now you can see that smooth color transition based on that gradient information in the gradient tool that I'm using. Now, if you don't have these in here, just like the swatches, you can click on this toolbar tool icon here, and we have reset gradients, load gradients, save gradients, and then all of our different gradients that we can add or append. So if we just click simple, we'll hit OK to reset them. We won't save that. And then you can see all the simple gradients that we have here. You can also create your own gradients. So if we click on this gradient icon, you can see that we have the gradients editor. And this allows us to come in and create gradients and save them out and load them in as we see fit. So basically what we're seeing here is we have the name, the gradient type. You can see solid or noise. Noise is going to give us a bunch of random gradient colors, but we'll leave it a solid. You can see how smooth we want it to be. So we can turn that down. Oops. I hit enter and it got out of that, and it will create a less smooth transition for us. And so what we can do is we can click and we can drag these around, and it's going to give us a different style of gradient. So now what will happen is our gradient will start off white, but it will take a longer time to get to that orange color. So if we hit OK, you can see it reflected up here in the options bar. And now when we create our gradient, it's a lot of white and then a little bit of orange. So even if I move across, it doesn't have that nice smooth transition unless I just do a little tiny one like this. We can also change that color. So if we don't want it to be white, we'll click on it, and then we can click on the color swatch at the bottom, and then we can change that color. Let's go back to hue, saturation, and brightness. So we click red, and then now you see we have a transition from red to that orange color. We can hit OK and create our gradient, and we have that transition. So you can get a lot of really cool looking options with gradients here. Now, if you click in the center, you will create a new swatch. And then if you move that around, you can see how it's going to affect that gradient. And then there's also these midpoints between the two colors. So we can have a lot of different looking options here. Let's change this to a different color. Maybe we'll do like let's do green just so it's easier to see. So now it goes from red to green to orange. So when I go across, you can see that transition. And then if we pick any of these other gradients, say the circle, we still have that same transition, red to green to orange. It just depends on how you click and manipulate that gradient. So I'm going to go back to this one. So that means you can come in here and you can add in as many color options as you want. You can make all kinds of different cool looking gradients for any project that you need here. Okay, and then we can always save that out, and then we can load that in later on. We can make a bunch of gradients, save them, and load them back on. So if you look at the options at the bottom, you can see the different stops. We can change the opacity with these markers at the top. So this is how opaque it's going to be. So let's pick, let's just pick a standard one. And let's say we don't want the it to go from white to blue. We want it to go from opaque to blue. We can change the opacity to 0, and then now you can see the opacity changes from 0 to 100%. So when we create our gradient, let's just clear that. Let's fill this in real quick here. We'll fill it in with black. So the background is black, but our gradient is opaque to blue. So when we create our gradient, you'll see that we see the background, we see the black background, and because this is all transparent, I said opaque, I meant transparent, it goes from the transparency to the 100% blue there. So I do that by clicking on the top markers, and you can also do different transparency markers here. So we can have it go transparent to 100% and then back to transparent again, and it'll give us this bar looking effect. So let's go ahead and fill this. So now when I do this, it's going to be transparent with a blue bar in the center and then transparent again. So that's a way that you can change the transparency at the top, and then the location is just where it actually is on the slider. You can delete these, so if I make a bunch of these, we can click on those and hit the delete button and it'll delete it out for us. And then the bottom, you can pick your color, and then the location, same thing, and then you can delete that out. So this gives us a lot of options with gradients that we can use. You'll find gradients used in a lot of different things. For instance, you can create shapes with gradients. So you can go to your fill, and then you can create a gradient fill. And then you can change things like the rotation angle and so forth. And so that's a great way to use shapes and gradients. You can also find that you'll use gradients with things like layer styles and adjustments. So if we go to the layer adjustments, you can see we have a gradient that we can lay down, or even a gradient map. And we won't get into gradient maps right here. I've talked about them in previous lectures, but we can adjust the way that the image looks based on its lightness and darkness values using gradients with the gradient map. So gradients are awesome. You'll find a lot of really cool uses for them, and hopefully that gives you some information on how you can use them in Photoshop.